Welcome back to the classroom, where you, me, and my trusty whiteboard go through matters pertaining to the body, heart, mind, and spirit. I'm Dr. Roshan Amnarain, and class is in session. Today is a really interesting class. It was requested by a good friend of mine, and what they requested was essentially the do's and don'ts of fitness, physical fitness, how to get fit. And as I reflected on exactly how best to present such a big topic, it became clear to me that I have to break it up into multiple lectures, and I have to, in true classroom fashion, break it down and start from the beginning. So today's lecture is going to be a very simple lecture. We're going to go through a journey of how do we get fit. So everyone who is watching this video have varying levels of fitness. There are some people who are relatively sedentary, who haven't for years, maybe they haven't sprinted, they haven't run. There are some people who maybe through whatever various illnesses, they can't squat and get off the ground. I'm sure there are some athletes watching this video as well, given the title. And so it doesn't matter what level of fitness you're at, because we all start off at point zero. I remember that after a particularly difficult period in my life, I was weighing at one point 200 pounds. Believe it or not, it was a pretty difficult time in my life, and I decided to turn things around. And so I met one of my roommates at that point, a guy from Tobago named Dane. He was into running, and so he took me running on the golf course that we live close by to. This was in the UK. And Dane was such a good-natured guy. Even though he was a seasoned runner, he kept up with me. And as a result of that, when I actually started at point zero, I could not have walked half the course. I tried walking and I had to turn around, and he had to help me just because I was so physically unfit. And through persistence, we're going to go every day, through his encouragement, I was then able to start walking. And so from that point, we progress to the ability. We unlock the ability to do something. May not do it well, but we begin with the ability. Point zero is when we can't even do it, but through some persistence, we gain an ability. And that's really important, because it's like we're graduating from kindergarten into first year, second year primary school. We can't do it very well, we struggle with it, but the fact that we can actually do it, coming from a place where we could not to begin with, is a very, very, very big deal. And from here, the ability, then we become competent. So at this point, here I was able to walk the circuit, the little lap that we used to run around the golf course. It was roughly about 5 kilometers through hills, valleys, ditches, over rivers. It was a really, really nice run in the English countryside. But I got the ability to walk that. And again, through persistence and through time, we were able to, he was always able to, but I was able to begin running it. I was able to start running that course. And again, running slowly, laboring, breathing, felt as if I was going to die. It was very unpleasant, but I became competent at it. And then through time, effort, motivation from Dane, you're a good guy, I hope you're okay. Then we develop, after competency, we develop proficiency. Now, I promise this isn't an exercise in the English language. I promise there is a rhyme and reason behind going through this timeline like this. And the reason being is because throughout each phase, there are physiological changes that we're going to talk about. And obviously at this point in time, your boy Dr. Roshan was running that 5K course in about 22 minutes. It was a really, really, really empowering and fascinating experience. This journey, whenever I have any problems in my life with my self-confidence, I remember this journey. This journey took the better part of a year. There were times when I would have left the hospital in my training, come home for lunch, throw on my winter gear with my gloves and my hat, and went to run. I put a lot of work into it. I will never forget my last run before I left England to come back home. And it was something that stays with me because it was just, I went from weighing 200 pounds to a lean 155. It was something that stays with me, and I'm glad and I feel honored and privileged to be able to share this journey with you. But I'm using this journey to underpin what's going on physiologically, because there are three components that we have to consider when it comes to physical fitness. We have to consider heart, we have to consider blood vessels. Well, I guess heart and blood vessels are one, but so I guess it's really four. Heart, blood vessels, muscles, and I guess, well, there's a fourth one. Heart, blood vessels, muscles, and what was the fourth one, boy? Third one, fourth one, heart, blood vessels. Oh, that's it. super embarrassing. Lungs, the ability to breathe. So along each one, there's physiological changes happening. And so from number 0 here, right, there was, let's say, the heart. I had a relatively high heart rate. I wasn't physically fit. The blood, I had a sort of minimal blood supply to my muscles. My muscles themselves, they were designed only to walk up and down stairs, albeit they were carrying a fair bit of weight, so my leg muscles would have been relatively well developed. And then my lungs was probably good for, again, walking upstairs, because at this point that was probably all the physical activity I was doing. But then through persistence, my heart rate, right, would have dropped, my HR would have dropped, yeah? And what's called my stroke volume would have increased. Now, what's that? Now, my heart would have gotten stronger through, again, just the sheer ability of pushing it a little bit. Because at this point, I went from not being able to do anything, I couldn't even walk the circuit, to now the ability to walk the circuit. So a lot of changes started to happen here, right? And so as my heart became stronger, it had a bit more muscles in it, because the pump had more muscles, it didn't need to beat as often. Why didn't it need to beat so often? Because the stroke volume, the volume of blood that it squirted out with each stroke, because it was pumping better, increased. So as the stroke volume increased, my resting heart rate decreased. That's why some athletes, their resting heart rates are in the 40s or 50s. So now, like when I'm asleep, my resting heart rate at sleep is around 49 to 51. And so my heart became stronger as here. Now, this entire journey, we can talk about the law of diminishing returns before I go on, because this is really important, because all these changes here are underpinned by all of these things. The law, I like graphs. So the law of diminishing returns means that as time go by, and this here is growth of ability, right? This is how much change happened, and as we go, it starts to taper off. So as we become more proficient, we don't really grow as much, because at this point we're fighting to shave off seconds off our time, and so the amount of growth that's happening isn't much. But at this point, because at this point you're so close to high performing, every second counts. And so, but the amount of growth that's happening is not much. So the majority of growth happens here. That's why I've placed this here to begin with. And this is where the majority of the lecture will happen. But between here and here, we're like around this piece of the graph. And when we're in proficiency, there isn't much growth. But the growth that happens, like I said, is very, very important. We're reaching the limits of human potential at this point in time. And our genetics, of course. So as we grow in our ability, our heart becomes stronger. This is how we get physically fit, so we don't feel like our heart is racing. So for anyone who, for instance, walks up a stairs carrying like a bucket of water, if they're cleaning your house, or like a stack of papers, and you feel your heart kind of fluttering a little bit, know that your stroke volume probably isn't the best because you're not challenging your heart very well. And so as a result of that, your heart rate has to be a bit high. So these are the changes that are happening with our heart as we begin the process of getting fit. Our blood vessels, I'm going to use a big word here, it proliferates. Our blood vessels proliferate via a really cool hormone called VEGF. It stands for, big fancy words, vascular endothelial growth factor. Big fancy word, but all it means is that this hormone is what allows our blood vessels to grow. So for instance, because my muscles aren't, I'm not asking much of my muscles, and forget the size, because I'm not asking much of my muscles, their blood supply isn't that great because the need to carry oxygen to them isn't that great. The need to remove lactic acid from them isn't that great. And the blood vessels represent the plumbing of the muscles. So think of someone like Bruce Lee, for instance, who isn't super big, but make no mistake, his muscles are very well served by blood vessels. Why? Because of all his movements and whatnot, he requires a lot of oxygen to go to them and a lot of lactic acid to be removed from them in an efficient manner. And we have the ability, guys, to grow new blood vessels via this hormone. So as we, again, begin to develop the ability, we begin to grow new blood vessels. And make no mistake, this growth of new blood vessels doesn't just happen in our muscles, it happens in our heart as well, which is only a good thing. The more plumbing you have in your heart, is the longer our life, I would dare to say, because again, you have something called collaterals, which helps to, in case there's blockage in your heart, to bypass the blockage. So blood vessels, we begin to proliferate blood vessels within our muscles, within our heart, within any part of our system that we use when we are exercising. Next comes the muscles themselves. So the muscles do something called hypertrophy, which is a big fancy medical term for growth. And our muscles grow because as we exercise and as we sort of, use our muscles, our muscles develop micro tears or micro trauma. They are small, tiny little tears that happen in the muscle by virtue of the shearing forces that we have when we use them quite a lot. The contraction, the expansion, the contraction, the relaxation, they create micro trauma, small bits of trauma, small bits of tear. And as we repair those muscles, they begin to get bigger. And so, for instance, like for anyone who goes to the gym, when they get swole, when they get that pump on after the gym, your muscles feel very big. It's because of that blood supply to them. So, but in addition to the blood supply to them, they get bigger. So, and it doesn't mean that we're going to get big and jacked and strong, but they get bigger, they get denser. We develop more muscle fibers in order to adapt to whatever exercise, whatever stress and strain we're putting on them. So in my case, it was running. So my legs got well developed, my core got well developed, my shoulders, my arms were not so much because I was just swinging them around, for instance. But depending on what load we place on them, our muscles get bigger through repairing the trauma. And as we go through this lecture series, maybe in another lecture, I can talk about different supplements that we can use to help us to augment these naturally occurring processes. And then finally, in the lungs, what happened there was that essentially I opened up areas to my lungs. I essentially opened up my lungs. So again, in addition to new blood vessels going into my lungs and increasing the capacity for my lungs to be able to exchange oxygen and for carbon dioxide, at rest, we ventilate usually this part of our lungs. And especially if we're hunched over, we're not really taking deep breaths, and we don't really use as much of our lungs as we can. But as we begin now to stress our lungs out, as I walk, as we begin to take deep breaths now, we increase our lung capacity. That's what it's called. So the medical term is essentially, I try to keep the medical terms out of it, but we increase our lung capacity. And again, that could be trained, because sometimes when I'm teaching people breathing exercises, they say, "Doc, I can't breathing as much as you can." I said, "Don't worry, you're just breathing as slowly." But that deep breath, the ability to take that deep breath, is something that we can train, because we can increase our lung capacity through aerobic exercise. And so all of these things come together in a beautiful, beautiful symphony to allow us to get fit. And at every stage of our journey, this gets more and more and more. Now, obviously, guys, there are a ton of other things going on in the background that are equally important, but I try my best to break it down as simply as possible, and so that perhaps as you go through your own fitness journey, you can have an appreciation for exactly what's happening, and that way you can be a bit more mindful about your own fitness journey. So, and don't forget the law of diminishing returns, because as anyone who's ever exercised will tell you, there will come a point where they plateau, and they have to do something else to break through that plateau. And so, for instance, in my own journey when I was running, there was a time where I was stuck at that 25-minute mark, and no matter how hard I tried to run, I couldn't break through that 25-minute mark. And what I needed to do was that there was this particularly challenging hill that if I'm honest, kind of intimidating me. And so because I was intimidated, I sort of held back from that hill. And the minute I was able to say, you know what, this hill, I'm going to conquer it, and I'm going to just go flat out, and I'll recover after, I was able to break that sub-25-minute mark. And so as a result of that, there are things that happen in our training that makes us plateau off. And it may not be something physical, like mental, but it might be a change in your technique, it might be a change in your running stride, it might be a change in your weight to break through that plateau. And so as we get to this point here, just remember, guys, that there's a law of diminishing return. As we get better and better, we have to put in more and more effort to get less and less. It's very similar to a student doing an exams. You know, if we barely study, we'll get 60%. If we study a bit, we get 70%. If we study a lot, we get 80%. But we have to really put the work in and really do an excellent job to get 90% and above. The law of diminishing returns. And so my hope is that you understand what comes with each stage of the journey. You understand what happens physiologically, and you understand that it's okay to not see the returns that you would have had for your effort as you go along your journey. That's okay. That's expected, actually. So that's today's lecture, guys. I hope that you understand what we talked about, and they will have future lectures where we talk about different supplements, different do's, different don'ts. But as much as the person requested, I do a fitness video. In the spirit of the classroom, we have to start at the basics, and then we'll work our way up. Because once we have understanding brings new insight into how our body works. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. If there's any questions or comments, you could leave it in the comment section below. And if there's any other video requests, feel free to send a video request. Until then, guys, class dismissed.